Hi guys, it's Miss Carr. Obviously, clearly by the accent, this is going to be a bit weird, but this is how we're going to do things until we find out if we're allowed to make little fun, joyful YouTube style tutorials. For now, you're just going to have to put up with my voice speaking over the PowerPoint. I figured even though it's going to be really boring, that's like it's not spoiler alert. What's the other one? And that's just like a warning, really. This is going to be boring. But hopefully it's going to be a bit better than you having to kind of read it. You can just chill back and listen to the narration. Well, actually, you can't chill back because this is a practice paper revision. So you should probably make some notes or something. So we're not calling them mocks anymore. We're calling them practice papers because we can't guarantee that you won't cheat, which I know you won't, because what would be the point? So really, it's about using these as an opportunity to get ready for year 11, I guess. So in drama, your practice paper, if I say mock, I'll have to put 10p in the jar when we get back to school, because it's not a mock, it's a practice paper. Now I've lost my train of thought already. That's really good, isn't it? A minute in. Anyway, I'm going to be narrating because we didn't really get a chance to go through what all the questions might look like. I know we've talked about some of them in class, especially the 4 and 6 markers, but I need to go through what a paper might look like with you. And I've even got this cool little thing. It's not really that cool, but see this little red thing here, my little laser pointer. So that will alert you to important things as we're going along. Right. Okay. So the important main things, and I'll go through these again at the end, but just very briefly, the most important things, kind of top mistakes people make, top tips, is read the question. You'll have heard this in all your other subjects probably, and you don't have much time on this paper, but it's worth spending, I would say, the extra 5 minutes that they give you for checking your answers. Rather than using that 5 minutes for checking your answers, maybe use it to make sure you understand the questions, because once you've finished the paper, 5 minutes is not going to do anything if you realize you haven't read the questions. So I would use those 5 minutes to really think about what the question is asking. That's really, I mean, you could write in quite a basic way. You don't have to try and be all posh. You can write in quite a basic way and still get full marks. That's the important thing to remember. You are GCSE students, not PhD students, so you don't have to write as if you are a dictionary to get full marks. But you do have to read the question and answer what it's actually asking for. This is actually my biggest struggle, because sometimes the questions are so convoluted and wordy, and it's a bit like, what's it saying? So I would use the 5 extra minutes for that. Now, we've talked about this in class. In a drama exam, the question will always be really asking for your perspective from the point of view of an actor, director, or designer. So that's always the case. Now, if you get that wrong, and I see it happen quite a lot, then however good your answer is, it's game over. So there was a question about how the actor should create mood, and a really, really strong student wrote this amazing lighting designer answer, got all the lights right, the Fresnels and the spots and the gels and the gobos and the uplighting, and it was a 0 mark answer, and had it been a lighting question, it would have been full marks. So you've got to be really careful to answer from the right perspective. So acting is obviously about your voice, your movement, your physicalization, your facial expressions, your gesture, your pitch, tone, inflection. It's also about how you are in the space, so your proxemics, which of course is how far away, how close you are standing to other characters or bits of scenery or props. You know, where you're going, levels, things like that. So that's your acting. Your designer is your semiotics. So we talked a bit about that in class as well. Well, we talked quite a lot about it during the portfolio writing. So the semiotics is obviously primarily lighting, sound, costume, set, props. So the lighting designer, the costume designer, and so on, the set designer. The director has overarching responsibility for everything. So as a director, the questions often allow you to write about both acting and design, but you have to be careful with the directing questions to look at the wording. So if it says, as a director, how would you direct the actors to do something, then it's referring specifically to how that you direct the acting. So just make sure that you get that you find that keyword. On that note, bullet point 2, circle all the keywords in the question. There are so many missed opportunities where students answer half the question. So for example, it's usually in the justify bit. So how would you use a prop to represent the character? I think we talked specifically about this example in class, actually, about how one of my students got 6 out of 6 for this question by talking about the use of the gun from Mickey, from the toy gun to the air gun to the real gun. So you can say that, you will get 3 marks out of 6, but if you don't say why, so e.g., when he's a child, it's a sense of foreboding that he's playing with guns, blah, 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 blah. Also sets it in the time period. That's the justification bit that then gets you the other bit of the marks. So always look at what the question is asking you to do. So it'll say something like, how would you use lighting to create impact? Loads of students will give a brilliant answer on lighting and forget about the impact bit. How will that specifically impact on the audience? If the exam asks for a specific moment, state which moment you're talking about. I know it sounds obvious, but you don't have to write this big thing about why you've chosen that. Just state the moment. And if it asks for a specific moment or an important moment, it will allow you to speak about any moment in the I almost said play, that would have been another 10p for the jar, but I didn't. In the musical, it can be any moment, because if it was not an important moment, it wouldn't be in there. One would hope that the playwright, author, would have left it out if it wasn't a key moment. So just make sure you state it. You can write about your own practical work when appropriate. So if you get an acting question, it's a really good idea to say, when I played Mickey in this scene, I used hot seating to develop my characterization by, for example. I mean, they love that. It's not completely necessary, but it is good practice to write about your own work where it helps to illustrate the point, answer the question. On that note, I'm going to say something about quotes as well. It's good to be able to quote text, but it's not like in English where you have to memorize a million quotes. It's just, it's nice if you have time, but it's not 100% necessary. This is an important one. You don't have very long on this paper. So on the Blood Brothers bit of the exam, which is the bit you're going to be sitting after Easter, and you've got a week before that happens, you can answer in bullet points. So there's no need to, again, waste time writing these big flowery paragraphs, because you're more likely to run out of time. If you need to bullet point, you're not going to lose any marks. Consider answering the question paper backwards. I think almost everybody in my class last year did that, and they did really well, I think partly as a result, because the 8-mark questions are a nightmare. It's sometimes a good idea to just unpick those first, just because they're worth more. It depends who you are and how you work. Maybe start with the 6 markers, and then go to the 4s. It's just for this particular paper, for this practice paper, I would try working backwards and see how you cope with that. And then you'll know for the mock that we come to do in probably November what works best for you. So managing your time is also important. It's about a mark a minute. So for a 6-mark question, you can be expected to spend 6 minutes on the question, which I appreciate is ridiculous. That gives you an indicator of how you don't have time to write an essay. In fact, the space that they give you is the space they recommend you use, although we all know there's always somebody, I can think of a few in this class, who would probably write over it. And I am also one of those people, but you don't need more space. So often when you get to the end of the space that they think is good for you, you've already written enough to get full marks. So don't, this is not a paper where you have time to waffle. Like with your portfolios, bit of waffle, padding out, great. But with the exam, you really have to read the question, figure out what it's asking, and then be really precise. The Blood Brothers bit of your GCSE is 25% of your whole GCSE. So it is quite a chunk. So the written bit of Blood Brothers is a quarter of your GCSE. Oh, look at me doing some maths there. Make sure you, make it as legible as possible. I mean, I know that's also difficult when you're trying to write fast. And this is the most important thing. This is definitely the reason that students did well last year. Answer all the questions. It doesn't matter if you have no clue what you're writing about. Write something down. I always say to my students, if in doubt, write the words social class. Probably get a mark. No, but seriously, even the students came out last year and they were, there were a couple that were crying and they were going, I didn't even understand any of the 8-mark questions. I don't remember what I wrote. I just said stuff, who got full marks. And there were a few students who got full marks, so 50 out of 50 on the Blood Brothers paper, who came out slightly hysterical. In fact, one student was absolutely convinced she failed. And having been predicted, I think a 4, I got an 8. So just write something in the boxes. You can't get any marks if you write nothing. And a lot of students across the country didn't, because some of the questions were so hard, especially the 8-mark questions, so hard that, you think, oh, well, if I had a week to think about it, but you don't, you've got seconds. So just write and it will be fine. Just write something, please don't leave any boxes blank. Well, that's good. That's almost 15 minutes, and that's the first slide. Not very good at being concise. Now might be a good time to take a break if you need a break from me already, but I am moving to the next slide. So this is how the beginning of the paper might look. So section A is the Blood Brothers part of the written exam. Section B is the theatre review part. You won't be doing the theatre review part after Easter because our trip was obviously cancelled. Coronavirus, just saying. So we're going to be setting a different way of doing that. So you're going to be watching a play online and writing about that as a practice paper later on in the year. So you don't need to worry about that right now. So you'll just be doing section A, which is a 55-minute paper, which is not a lot of time. It will have a list of set texts. These are the ones that you never knew that you had the opportunity to study because we didn't pick them. We picked Blood Brothers because it's the most enjoyable one, we think. In this bit, and this will sound like it's pretty obvious, you need to write down the text that you studied. Now, one year, somebody wrote Death of a Salesman. That's all I'm saying. Don't let that person be you. You may have read another one and be like, ooh, Gizmo, cool play. I'm going to write about that. Please write about the play that we've actually studied for a term. That would be in your favor. Don't think I need to say anything else about that particular slide. So that was good. I'm speeding up. Okay, so there are 2 4-mark questions, 3 6-mark questions, I want to say, and 3 8-mark questions. We believe that to be the case, but we shall see. So for a 4-mark question, clearly you would be either making 4 points or 2 points with justifications. If you make 4 points, you still have to justify, so only do that if you're really fast and really, quick in your thinking. So this one here, select one line and explain how it has an impact on the character. So Edward says, oh, and by the way, this is quite a good thing to think about. A 4-mark question is worth 2% of your entire GCSE, the whole thing. So if you leave just a 4-mark question blank, then that's 2% you can never get. And I'm just going to go on to another document here. Unanimously, we agreed that to disagree a little bit with the exam board on this one. We think it's a bit of a shady question. What impact does the line "my mummy doesn't allow me to play down here" actually have on the character? It's asking you to say that they're not allowed to play together. Edward's not allowed to see Mrs. Johnston. It shows the class divide, results in Mickey and Eddie becoming blood brothers, which all have an impact on Edward throughout the play, because he deliberately disobeys his mother, resulting in the friendship. Class divide is a recurrent theme and has an ongoing impact. But I think it's quite a difficult question because it's more about the fact that his mum doesn't allow him to play down there, and he still does, that has an impact. So it's a difficult question, but if a question is difficult, then they will allow a wider response. They didn't really change the grade boundaries, but they allowed a much wider response. This one here is interesting because those funny little doodles are actually, I don't know what's happened. They're meant to be the pictures of stages. It's probably me, and I'm like with technology. I don't know what's happened there, but they would be pictures of stages. Can I just say right now that these are not the exact questions that will come up. There'll be variations of them, but this is a kind of general theme or style. So it's really important that you know your stages. I will go over this in another tutorial, which is what we're going to call these little things. We'll go through those at another time. I mean, we've been through them in class. You've used all the stages. If you think back to the first term, we did that hospital scene where you did in the round, traverse, thrust. Now, what you would have to do for this is select one stage design, and it has, you can't see it here obviously, all the sets and lighting and everything on it as well. and then justify why it would be suitable for a production of the performance text you've studied, the performance text clearly being Blood Brothers, as we've said. Now, you could give 4 reasons again, or 2 with justifications. You do have to justify. It says quite clearly, justify. I think that for Blood Brothers, the most sensible thing is to say that a proscenium arch stage would be the most suitable. It works best for Blood Brothers. It's how it's usually staged. And this is because it has an orchestra pit for the musicians, and Blood Brothers is a musical. That's 2 marks right there, because you've said orchestra pit and you've said musical. So, boom. So if you get asked a question about why would In the Round be a disadvantage, for example, you could say there's no orchestra pit and it's a musical. So that's one reason. And then in the original picture, there were bits of scenery that were useful. So I think there was a balcony to allow for segregation of higher and working class, which was really visible, if I remember right. So obviously levels. There were loads of archways in the picture, which is good for entrances and exits, and doorways to the houses on either side of the rich neighborhood and the poor neighborhood, showing the class divide. There was a staircase in the original image. So if you get a picture, then unpick anything in there that would suit Blood Brothers. If you don't get a picture and you get asked which would be a suitable set, then I would go for proscenium arch, but you're not going to lose marks if you go for In the Round if you've got the skill to argue. And that has been done in the round before. I think there was a Chinese production of it in the round, actually, but don't quote me on that. So it can be done. Everything can be done in any way. Like if you did want to do In the Round, you could say that it's flexible. It allows for many entrances and exits and aisles, which is suitable for things like kids game and the shootings. It allows for kind of intimacy between audience and actors, which enables closer relationship and the audience to be drawn into the relationship with the brothers, making the ending more hard-hitting. I'm sure you can imagine the opening of the death scene being quite powerful, with the singers coming in from all areas. But there are disadvantages as well. So just make sure that you pick the one that you know the most about, but know your stage. Well, this is going well. We're only on question 3, and you're probably asleep. But anyway, wake up, because this is the question we talked about in class. This is the easy question. There is actually no excuse not to get full marks on this question for anybody. Probably there won't even be one next year, because who knows, because there has been one every year like this. So you get your little table with your character. So in this case we have Mrs. Lyons, not Linda. We do have a Linda in our play, but this is the Linda from Death of a Salesman, which we've already said we're not talking about. So Mrs. Lyons, blah, blah, so Mrs. Lyons, use of voice, 3 ways in which the actor could use their voice to portray the character. And then the justify means why. It's an example. Why? This is such a good question. So you say the voice here and why you would do it. So, for example, strained and tense tone, because Mrs. Lyons is keeping a secret from her husband and struggles to conceal it. Frantic and loud when she tries to, when she tries to convince Mrs. Johnson to give her a twin. You can even, you will get marks for straightforward answers like posh, to show that she is middle upper class. That's 2 marks. You don't have to, like I said before, you can be really straightforward. You can actually just put, like say the character was Edward, you could just put formal tone, good upbringing. You'd get the marks. So there's no excuse for that not getting, I expect 6 out of 6 on this kind of table question. Also, it obviously isn't always going to be voice. It could be physicalization, or it could be characteristics, which means personality traits. But those are the nice questions. We like those. Then we've got, I was right. So there's 2 more 6 markers. Gets a little bit harder now. This is a pretty horrible question in a way. So, using examples from the text you've studied, how stage directions can be used to support the actors in communicating their role to the audience. So really, 6-mark question, give 3 stage directions with 3 ways in which they can support the actors in communicating their role. Because I don't think you have time to do that 6 times. So how can the stage directions be used to support the actors? So it's totally irrelevant to say things like, this will tell us when it's nighttime and therefore we need to dim the wash, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to get any marks. It's an acting question. And it's a difficult one. You don't have to memorize loads of stage directions in the same way that you don't have to memorize loads of quotes. There are some general reasons why stage directions are important for actors that kind of regularly apply. In terms of you need to say why it's relevant. But this is a really good question for allowing for a personal response, for you to say, think about the scene that you performed for Blood Brothers between Mickey and Eddie right before we were all sent home, literally right before we were all sent home, and how what were the stage directions in that scene. You could write about that scene alone and get the full marks, and say, what do the stage directions, how did they help you? How did they help inform you of how to be with Eddie, with Mickey, with the other person you were playing? How did it tell you anything about distance, about coming together, about, I'm sure it described the cutting of the hand with the Blood Brothers bit. Did it say anything about tone, about facial expression, how they are together? So stage directions help the actor know where to stand, and where to be, and that symbolizes things. So like perhaps Mickey is on his own when he's lonely before Eddie enters, and you're putting him, I don't know, center stage, downstage. It depends what it says, obviously, in the stage directions. Stage directions tell actors when to enter and exit, which is important for flow. There's a really complicated, the complicated scene with the police coming in and the robbery as well is really complicated. There's loads of entrances and exits there, so it might be worth looking at stage directions in that scene. You don't have to know exactly what it says, but it might be good to have a little bank of stage directions in your head. 3, 4, 5 from one scene or a couple of scenes, which have a real impact on the actors. The stage directions inform actors as well as designers, but actors too, about any props and furniture in the scene. So, Mickey's looking for his pills. That's significant. They inform the actor of how to interpret and deliver lines. So it might actually say with sarcasm in the stage directions. Clearly, obviously, stating the obvious, the stage directions are the bits in brackets. I know we've all had our moments where we've accidentally read them out in a Liverpudlian accent, forgetting that they were stage directions, but we'll just move on from that. What else are they good for? Well, they're obviously good to tell the time of day, the location, but that might be important, might not be important for the actor in that scene. Remember, it's a question about how it informs it for the actor. It might have comments about blocking, levels, movement, relationships, things like that. So here it's another stage question. So you've got two in this mock paper. The advantages and disadvantages when presenting the performance text you studied in the round. I think it's pretty straightforward. We touched on it earlier. We've done quite a bit of work in the round, so I think we're pretty confident about advantages and disadvantages in the round. But obviously, as a little recap, engagement with the audience is more natural. There are stronger actor-audience relationships. The acting is more naturalistic because you have to turn your back sometimes. The seating is more versatile, perhaps. The stage is on the same level as the audience. You can have quite a close proximity with, as the audience can have quite a close proximity with props and set as well, so you can get more realism and detail in there, which may be an advantage, may not. It is difficult in terms of disadvantages to block in the round. Movement can feel a bit artificial for actors because of that, because again, this question is asking for an actor. So I'm talking here about advantages and disadvantages for audience and actor. This is asking from the perspective of an actor specifically. So, I mean, the most obvious thing is what I was saying about building a relationship with the audience is an advantage, but constantly having to be aware of where you're facing is a disadvantage for the actor. So those are some ideas there. And we have now we begin on the 8-mark questions, and you'll see that these are game changers. Really, they've become quite difficult now. And it usually you can give 4 points with 4 justifications, or you can give 2 points if you are really good at writing justifications. So a lot of my students have got full marks on these, writing 2 really good points on the 8-mark questions. It doesn't apply to all of them. Writing 2 really good points with kind of 3 justifications. So if you're good at writing those in depth about, symbolically, and you like English and you like to analyze and go into depth, the 8-mark questions are for you, because you can do that here. So how a director, so here we go, this is completely, I can think of someone in our class who would love this question. As a director, how you would stage the opening of the performance to engage the audience. So the keywords here are there, director, the opening of the performance. Don't start going on about the whole play. I did it. That's 10p for the jar. The whole musical. In fact, when this was marked, when they said that this only has to relate to the opening, you don't even have to have an awareness of the rest of the musical, which is madness, but there you go. I would set it in a context that could work. So director, opening, and then here's where it falls apart. If you don't then talk about how it engages the audience, by drawing them in and making them want to see more and having them on the edge of their seats, then you have lost half of the marks already before you've even begun. And this question asks you to refer to the direction of the performers and or the design. So you could write 1 point about acting with 3 justifications, 1 point about design with 3 justifications. Or you could write just about the acting, or just about the design. It's really about working out how you best answer questions. But the important thing is to make sure that you've circled the keywords. Doop, doop, doop. Sounds really obvious now, but when you have 8 minutes to do the question, it's a bit like, panic. So, just some possible things to say. The director might direct the actors to use certain physical and vocal techniques to have an impact on the audience. So maybe Mrs. Johnston trembles as she covers Mickey with her coat, gently places the brothers' hands together, slowly raising her head and looking out to the audience with a resigned but proud expression is what I've written. And then this will make the audience feel empathy for her loss, but also an understanding that the twins belong together in life and death and that they could never be parted. That's like loads of marks right there, because you've said, here's how the actor's going to act it, and here's why this is going to make the audience care. In terms of design, you might say something like, I had this a minute ago. How maybe something like a spotlight on the two brothers to focus attention onto them and the tragedy that that's occurred. So, that will focus the audience's attention on where they're supposed to be looking, and maybe that could grow to flood the stage by the time the final performer is on, to show the audience how many people are affected and to create a build-up for the audience. Could even throw some color in there and put a blue gel in to set a kind of somber mood. A gel, if you don't know, is that little bit of crinkly stuff, cellophane stuff that goes over the light that creates the colors. So don't say a blue color. So you can say anything about semiotics here. We'll talk about lighting at another point. 2 more questions, you say, whilst you snore away. This is a fab question. If this question came up, I would be like, woohoo, because it's a great question. Describe one costume for a character, so you can choose the character, and then justify why your choices are appropriate. So you have to obviously say who you're designing for. Now, I've seen a lot of papers where people do a little gorgeous cartoon-style drawing of the character. If you're not going to label the drawing with, what it is and why, then you're just wasting valuable time. Leave the box blank, because you will have space to write in as well. You're not getting any marks for the drawing. So it's just, I just know who would do this in our class as well, and so do you. It would be me also. In my biology AS level exam, I was drawing these amazing tulips, did not get any marks, that's all I'm saying. Just a bit of advice there. So this question is so easy to get marks in, and you don't even need eight minutes for it. So say Mickey, age 7. In terms of costume, you need to think about what the costume looks like, the time period, the personality of the character, the status of the character, the color and the texture and the fabric of the costume. Make notes. I know who's making notes right now. And the costume does include hair, makeup, and accessories as well, where appropriate, like shoes and hats. So if you run out of things to say, chuck in a baseball cap if it's Mickey. Well, probably not actually. Just don't do that. But if you run out of things. So I would probably pick Mickey if I was doing this question and say Mickey, age 7. Rough bobbly sweater. And then is your second half. Why? Here's your justification. Rough bobbly sweater. Well, because it's been used over and over. Point 2, it's too big because it's a hand-me-down, because they don't have any money. So it used to be Sammy's. It has holes in it and it's dirty because he's poor and he doesn't look after his clothing. It's green or brown because it's dull and unfashionable. Short trousers to fit with a time period. They're kind of maybe school uniform trousers and set between the 60s and 80s. So it's around this in the 60s somewhere here at this when he's this age. Messy, greasy hair sticking out all over the place to show that he likes to play rough, climb trees, things like that. Perhaps you want a school tie tied around his head to show his lack of respect for authority. You've already clocked up more than your 8 points here, but you can add scuffed trainers to show he's working class. Brown and black smudges on his face to show he doesn't care about his appearance, plays outdoors a lot. Could come across as neglected. Mother has no time. Lots of siblings. I've just given you about 16 marks there. Nice question. I'm hoping that one year, maybe in your year, we'll get one of these 8 markers for lighting. That would be good. Maybe that will happen for you. And then I think this is the final one. It is. Right. The social, historical, cultural context of blood brothers. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do this in a tiny bit of space of time, so you're going to have to pay attention for like another 5 minutes. Sorry, guys. You have to know it like the back of your hand. If you look in your Blood Brothers Bible, there's loads of information in there. We have touched on it quite a lot, actually. We've talked a lot about education. We've talked a lot about the working class and the big class divide, but we've only really touched on Thatcherism and coal mines and all of that. So we haven't talked in super historical depth about it, even though one person in our class is quite keen to do so, and I'm sure we'll do very well on this kind of question. So these always come up. Like this one says how social and or historical context can be seen in the performance text, but last year, I think it was just, if I remember right, it was just cultural. So that was an 8 marker on just cultural context and how you would direct the actors to show the cultural context. That was a difficult question, but we had quite a few get 8 marks on it. So know your context. So this one is just asking you to give 2 examples. So because it's an 8 marker, that's 2 examples with 3 justifications. And how they can be seen in the text. That's actually quite an easy question because it gives you an opportunity to do both, and it's how it can be seen in the text. Usually the questions will be harder than that. So the social context refers to the relationships and interactions between the characters and events in the text. And the historical context refers to the time and the period the text is in, and the time period the playwright was writing, because they are interlinked, and the context within the text, and when and where the narrative is set. So you need to think about things you could discuss. If you're discussing social class, for example, that's the easiest one to discuss if this kind of thing comes up. You could use we talked about this in class actually. You could talk about the police prank scene being or the school scene. We said that both of those are brilliant, the best scenes to discuss for this, in terms of showing the difference and the divide in the classes, the way that the police officer treats the 2 different parents and the 2 different boys for being part of the same prank, and obviously the complete difference in their education. If you're talking about culture, then you might want to talk about, we said this in class as well, about the media and youth culture and the example of cowboys and Indians and also the montage scene, which we tried to recreate with mixed amounts of success. That's all I have to say about that. is a good one for showing both the time period and the youth culture. We talked about how teenagers kind of became a thing then. Lucky us. And that, that their whole growing up montage bit that we kind of performed is good for that. Trying to think what else would be good to talk about here. A really good one, a really obvious one. I think almost everyone in wrote about this last year, about the divide in the class being shown through rich housing, poor housing, either side of the stage. It's the most obvious way to. I'm actually losing my voice. Has that ever happened before? Yeah, really, really obvious way to do it. So just a couple more bits on that. Willie Russell uses Mickey and Edward to explore social class and identity and how their lives are affected by this. So obviously Edward's raised in a middle upper class family. Mickey's raised by a working class mother. So as I said, the scene with the police and the scenes with the schools are the best ones to talk about here as examples. It is set, as you know, in Liverpool. So there was a lot of poor quality housing for working class, often close to docks and factories, with lots of terraced housing with basic amenities. So you could have, that kind of terraced housing on one side of the stage with much more elegant housing on the other side of the stage. There's a small person in my kitchen now making toast in the background, which is a little bit distracting. That's all I'm saying. But moving on to the last bit. Unemployment and recession is something that you need to look into. Oh, by the way, when I played Oh Bright New Day in class and told you guys about them being rehoused, that was part of a big project to move people from that poor housing and that cramped housing. If you're writing about unemployment and recession, the song that I said was my favorite, the one that's like, it's just a sign of the times, Miss Joe, that one is a good one to write about because it really does show that. It shows when it was written in the 80s and the recession happening then and the unemployment. Obviously this results in Mickey resorting to crime, ending up in prison, Eddie sorting it out. This is a huge bit because it has an impact on the whole rest of the musical. You need to look into Margaret Thatcher's reign, if in doubt, and you don't know a lot about it. Check your Blood Brothers Bible or ask the political expert in our group. Person in the kitchen has just mouthed who that is. That's correct. So obviously unemployment at the time led to an increase in depression and crime rates, which is shown through Mickey's character. I'm waffling now. It's all in the Bible. And there's way more. You just need to really look at this. Is what we would have covered before your actual, what would have been your mocks and is now practice papers, and we just didn't get a chance. So I didn't go into in super detail the social historical context. We kind of skimmed the surface. So please look into that in a little bit more depth. Pray that this is your last slide. Yeah, so it is, because then it would be section B. That was the toast popping. Excellent. That's a perfect way to end this. So section B would then be your live theatre production, which you won't be doing for your practice paper. So we're going to ignore that because that